Hello, fellow food lovers. Today I will be making Chinese fish and tofu hot pot with barbecue pork and Chinese mushroom. You will need half a fish fillet, I'm using basa, 1 block of firm tofu, a quarter-pound of barbecue pork, and 6 shiitake mushrooms soaked overnight if they're dry. For the fish batter, you will need 1 cup of white flour, half a cup of cornstarch, 1.5 teaspoon baking powder, a quarter teaspoon salt, and 1 cup of water. You may need more water, maybe an additional quarter cup. For the sauce, you need 1 tablespoon oyster sauce, 1 tablespoon soy sauce, 1 teaspoon chicken powder, 1 tablespoon ginger, and 1 tablespoon cornstarch. Okay, so this isn't on the list of ingredients. This is napa cabbage. It's optional. This is a hot pot, which is kind of like a casserole in Hong Kong. It's not like the hot pot that you cook at the table. It's like a casserole they serve in a clay pot. So generally for those, they'll put some boiled veggies in the bottom of the dish. So either napa cabbage or boiled iceberg lettuce. So that's totally optional. So if you have some napa cabbage or iceberg lettuce, feel free to use it. And then what you do need is 1 block of firm tofu, and you're going to cut it into about 10 slices. So I'll cut it straight down the middle along the long side, and then I'll cut that into 10 slices like that. So the tofu will be deep fried later. Okay, so I have a whole basa fillet. I'm just going to use half the fish. So I'm going to take the thick side. I'm going to use half of that. I'm going to use half the fish, but the thick side. So I'm going to cut that into maybe 6 to 8 pieces. So I'm going to add a bit of salt to the fish just to season it. Just a pinch. I'm going to mix that into the meat with my fingers. Okay, I'm going to make the batter now. So I have white flour. I'm going to use 1 cup of white flour. So this is the batter for the fish. And half a cup of cornstarch. I'm going to add 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. And a quarter teaspoon of salt. I'm going to start with a cup of water. It's likely I'm going to need more water, but I'll start with a cup. I'll give that a whisk. So what you're looking for is a really thick batter, but not a paste. So this is looking to be a paste right now. So that's a paste. You want to add just enough water that paste becomes a really thick batter. You don't want too much water because you don't want a thin batter, because a thin batter, if you use that, the fish, it won't stick to the fish when it deep fries, and it'll likely fall off the fish. So what you want is a little more than a paste, so a really thick batter. So that's getting there. I think that might still be a little too thick. So add just maybe 1/8 cup of water, just a wee bit. It takes as little as 1/8 a cup of water for it to change from a paste into a really thick batter. Like, you don't need to add a lot of water. So this is actually perfect. Okay, I got some shiitake mushrooms. You're gonna use 6 shiitake mushrooms for this dish. Probably 6 small ones. If you have large ones, you can cut them in half. So the stem is not edible. You want to cut that stem out. You can either throw the stem out or you can save it and use it for making soup stock. It's really good for that. So most of these mushrooms are kind of on the small side, so you don't need to cut them in half. There's a couple of big ones that I should cut in half. Like that one right there definitely has to be cut in half. Okay, so you need between maybe 6 to 8 mushrooms. Okay, so I have the wok on high heat. I have it filled up to half full with oil. So after 5 minutes, you want to test to see if it's hot enough. So I use a wooden chopstick. I'll dip it in the oil. If it bubbles like that, then it's hot enough to deep fry with. So I'm going to slide the tofu slowly along the side of the wok into the oil. You want to be very careful you don't splash or burn yourself. So I like to slide the tofu along the side. That looks like it may be a little too much oil this time. You have to be careful that it doesn't overflow. It could cause a grease fire. But once the oil's cooled down, it will look like this. It'll be less bubbles. So you want to give it an occasional stir. Make sure that they're not stuck together. So you want to fry the tofu until it's nice golden brown, and then you can take it out. You don't need to put a coating on it. Some people will dip it in something like cornstarch before they fry it, but it's totally unnecessary, and it doesn't even taste any better. I prefer doing it without any kind of coatings, directly into the deep fry, uncoat with anything. Okay, so I've got the fish pieces. I'm gonna drop it into the batter. I'm gonna mix it up. I'm going to make sure that each piece is coated on both sides with batter before I drop it in the oil, like that. So we're using about half a fish fillet for this one dish. If you want to make 2 servings, you're going to use the whole fish fillet, but you need to double everything else as well. Okay, once you dropped the fish into the oil, you want to take a metal spoon and you want to kind of make sure that they're separated, they're not stuck together. If the fish are stuck together, once they're almost done and you break them, they won't look as good. So you need to kind of separate them earlier on, like that. Okay, once the batter is a nice golden brown like that, it's pretty much done. So when the batter is a light color, it's not done. The fish will probably be raw inside. So you want to cook it until the fish is a nice golden color on the outside. Okay, so I recycle the oil. Usually I'll pour it through a sieve into a metal container and I'll leave it on top of the stove for whenever I need to deep fry. And I washed the wok. There's a bit of fire underneath the wok. I probably got a bit of oil on there. So I washed the wok. I have it on high heat. And then I added 2 tablespoons of oil, and I added the garlic. And then I stir-fried the garlic for about 30 seconds, and I added the shiitake mushrooms. I didn't even know there was a fire going on under there. Okay, I'm going to add the water that the shiitake mushrooms were soaking in. That has a lot of flavor, so we're going to add that in. And I'm going to add 1 cup of water to that. So yeah, the shiitake mushrooms, most times when you buy it, it's dry. So you need to soak it at least overnight or 24 hours. So you would take the mushrooms, you put it in a bowl, and then you would add tap water, cold tap water to it, and let it soak overnight. And then that'll soften it and rehydrate it. You can't use it like straight out of the bag right away. Okay, we're gonna let the water come to a boil. You need to cook the shiitake mushrooms a bit. So you want to actually boil it in the water for a little while, maybe 3 to 5 minutes. Okay, so I added a tablespoon of oyster sauce. I'm going to add a tablespoon of soy sauce. A teaspoon of chicken powder. And I'm going to make the cornstarch slurry now to thicken up the sauce. So I'm going to take a heaping tablespoon of cornstarch. And I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of water to that to make the cornstarch slurry. And then I'm going to stir it, make sure the cornstarch is well dissolved in the water. Okay, so the shiitake mushrooms have been boiling for about 5 minutes, so you want to cook it. So I added the cornstarch slurry to thicken up the sauce now. So we're going to kind of assemble the dish now. So the sauce is thickened up nicely. When you're saucing battered items, like the battered fish or battered chicken or anything like that, you want the sauce to be on the thicker side. It was a little too thick, so I added a bit of water. You want the sauce to be a little on the thicker side. If it's a little on the thin side, the batter will get soggy quite quickly and it'll fall apart. Okay, so I have about 7-8 slices of barbecue pork, about a quarter pound of barbecue pork. I threw it in there. And then the deep fried tofu, I threw it in there as well. And the battered fish pieces, I'm going to throw it in there as well. So this is a very classic Hong Kong type of dish. It's usually served in a clay casserole dish called a hot pot. And usually the hot pot, the casserole dish would be baked in the oven until it's nice and hot. And then usually you'll place it on a plate. And then you would put usually they put leaves on the bottom, like they'll boil some iceberg lettuce or some napa cabbage and they'll line the bottom of the clay pot with it. And then they'll put this over top of the leaves. So this is called hot pot in Hong Kong restaurant lingo. Again, it's not the same as the type of hot pot that you would get where people sit around a table with boiling soup in the center and they're cooking things in it. This is not the same kind of hot pot. Basically, hot pot in kind of Hong Kong lingo kind of pertains to like a casserole served in a clay pot. Okay, so I have a pot with some water. I'm just going to bring it to a boil. And then I'm going to throw those napa cabbage leaves in there and boil them really briefly until they're cooked. So maybe 3-4 minutes is fine. You want to give it a stir once in a while so that it's all immersed in the water. Okay, so it's cooked. So I'm going to take the napa cabbage out. I'm going to layer the bottom of the dish. So again, this is usually served in a clay pot, but I don't have one, so I'm just going to serve it in a Pyrex glass pie plate instead. So yeah, so line the bottom of the pie plate with the boiled napa cabbage, and then we're going to put the rest of it on top of that. This is a really nice dish. It's one of my favorite dishes when I eat out usually. It's a nice combination. It's got, the battered fish, the tofu, barbecue pork, and shiitake mushrooms. So there you have it. That's fish and tofu hot pot with barbecue pork and shiitake mushroom. So usually if you go into a Hong Kong style restaurant and you look at the menu, it'll just say fish and tofu hot pot or fish and tofu casserole. But what you get will actually be usually battered fish pieces, deep fried tofu, the barbecue pork, and the shiitake mushrooms. One of my favorite dishes. Whenever I go to eat, I almost always will get it. Okay, bon appetit.